Hi everyone, welcome to a reading vlog. So once again, we are doing a themed reading vlog, and today's theme is Kingfisher. So this is part of something that I've been wanting to do for a while, where essentially I take a author that I have maybe read one or two books from and then read a couple of more things from them back to back in quick succession to figure out really how do I feel about this author. So this is for authors who have a decent amount of backlist, and I've either maybe read one book from them and I want to figure out, do I want to keep reading their books or track, either digging into their backlist or tracking their new releases, or in a scenario where maybe I've read two books and I liked one but I didn't like the other, so I'm trying to figure out which one of those books was the anomaly experience, or is there some pattern to which of their books I do like and which of their books I don't. So I want to do this with a couple of different authors, but I thought I'd start with Kingfisher, partially because she has a decent amount of backlist. Most of them are pretty short, so it's easy to do a project like this, but also because I have now read two books from Kingfisher. One of them I liked, one of them I didn't, and this is going to be the tiebreaker to figure out once and for all, how do I feel about Kingfisher as an author? So, the two books that I have read from Kingfisher, the first one that I read a couple of years ago was The Raven and the Reindeer, which I think was a Snow Queen retelling, and it didn't do a lot for me. I wasn't that into it. The other one that I then read this year was Nettle and Bone. I kind of impulse bought and read it. I hadn't really intended to continue on reading anything from Kingfisher, but Nettle and Bone intrigued me, and I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun with it. I liked the humor that she had in it, even as it was dealing with some very difficult, dark topics, and just like the characters, it was just very fun, and I really enjoyed it a lot. So now we got to figure out, how do I truly feel about Kingfisher? So I have three books on my TBR for this vlog, trying to kind of hit a couple of different types of books that she seems to write. So I have a fairy tale retelling, a more like middle grade, so like a younger reader book, and then something that is horror, because she does write some horror. Even though I am not a horror reader, I thought I should try out at least one of her horror books just to see what I think. Okay, so the fairy tale retelling that I picked is Bryony and Roses. I've heard good things about it. I think it is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, which sometimes I like Beauty and the Beast retellings and sometimes I don't, so we'll see how it goes. The book for younger readers that I picked was A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking, which looks like it's going to be cute and funny and have some baking magic in it and just a lot of fun. And then the horror book that I picked was What Moves the Dead. This is her other new release and her one other traditionally published book. So I will also be able to see if what I think of her, indie published versus traditionally published books, if there's any pattern there. Although horror is very different from other things that, like fairy tale retellings that I've read, so we'll see. I feel like that is the one that I am maybe least likely to enjoy, just because I know I'm not really a horror reader, but I thought that I should give her horror a try. Anyway, that is my TBR for this vlog. I'm not totally sure what I'm going to start with. I might start with A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking, because that just sounds like it's going to be really fun and cute. All of these, I don't have them physically at the moment, so I'm going to be reading all of these either as ebooks or audiobooks because I can get them on Scribd, and I have the audiobook for Defensive Baking, so I might go with that one first. Hello, so I meant to check in when I was at 50% of the way into A Wizard's Guide for Defensive Baking, but I didn't. I finished the book. So here we are to talk about the whole thing. Starting with, what is this book about? So this, I would say, is probably like a late middle grade, I would guess, for the age range, but I'm not always great at determining that kind of thing. But it's set in this world where there are various city-states and there are wizards in this world, which is pretty much anybody who has magic. And in some of these city-states, wizards are more accepted or safe in others. And the city-state in which this takes place is one of the ones where wizards are generally pretty safe to live here. As I was saying, wizards usually have some kind of affinity for something or element that they're able to influence, and then their magic can kind of vary in terms of like how powerful they are, and also vary in terms of like how usable the thing or element is that they have an affinity for. However, sometimes it's more about creativity than about how like obviously usable something is. So our main character, she is a wizard, and she has an affinity for baking, or really for bread. So she can work with bread, dough, most baked goods. She can put magic into them and influence them. And she kind of thinks of herself as not a very good wizard, because like, what can you really do with bread? But she is a pretty good baker, and that works out really well because her aunt and uncle, who she lives with, own a bakery, and she works there. She has a magic sourdough starter named Bob, and the story kicks off when the main character, I think her name was Mona, goes to the bakery one morning and finds a dead body, and then she somehow ends up being falsely accused of being the murderer, which leads her to finding out about maybe some more plots against wizards and against the whole like city that they live in. And overall, I enjoyed this. I don't know if it's one that's going to like really stick out to me or be super memorable, but I definitely had a fun time. I enjoyed that there was baking magic in it. I kind of wish there was like more baking magic involved, more time like actually spent baking, but it was still very fun. I enjoyed her little like baked good sidekicks. There's of course Bob the sourdough starter, but she also has a little gingerbread man who follows her around, who is like very opinionated, and I enjoyed him a lot too. I think that the things that I liked most about this were probably more of the thematic elements to it. Things around responsibility, adults not really taking seriously the responsibility and power that they hold, which then puts responsibility and danger onto children in order to deal with that. It also had some really interesting commentary around heroism and the pain involved in being a hero, I guess. I think that those kind of thematic elements were probably my favorite part. Don't know if it was like super memorable, but it was definitely fun, and I gave this one 3.5 stars. So, since that one is finished, we are on to the second book, which I think is going to be Bryony and Roses, which is the Beauty and the Beast retelling. Now, this one I am not sure how it's going to go, just because recently I haven't had the best of luck with Beauty and the Beast retellings. I DNF'd like 2 or 3 of them this year alone, although I did read and like one other one, so we'll see. I'm just like a little... I'm a little unsure how it's going to go, but I thought I should give another one of her, fairy tale retellings a try. So we'll see. Hello. So I'm about 40% of the way into Bryony and Roses. I thought I would do a quick update on where I'm at, how I'm feeling about the book so far. So what the book is about, it is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. We start out following Bryony as she is on her way home, going through a snowstorm and realizing that she might not make it because the snowstorm is more severe than she anticipated. And along the way, she encounters a mysterious and abandoned seeming manor. What she goes into, it's clearly magical in some way, because like food appears, fires light themselves. She spends the night, and then as she's about to leave, she takes a rose to bring back to one of her sisters, and that's when the beast appears to stop her, and he demands that to repay for the fact that she was about to steal his rose, she has to come live with him at this house and be the gardener. But she has 1 week at home in order to kind of get everything settled and prepare her sisters. Otherwise, but then after that, if she doesn't come back, the house will come get her. So she does all of that. She comes back and she lives at the house and is, you know, starting a garden, getting to know the beast, and realizing that maybe there's some kind of curse because there are certain things that the beast cannot talk about. Okay, so feelings about the book so far. So far, I think that I don't always like Bryony's humor specifically because it is a more sarcastic humor, and it just is like, it's fine. It's not like really working for me. Sometimes sarcastic humor can work for me, sometimes it doesn't, and it's not hitting me right for some reason in this case. The sarcastic humor kind of also ties into the dynamic that she has with the beast, because so far all of the interactions she's really had with the beast have mostly been kind of like a sarcastic banter between the two of them, which is also not doing a lot for me. It's not really selling me on anything about their dynamic. I'm hoping that as I go further into it that there will be more like moments of more sincere connection, because sarcastic banter can be entertaining, but like it doesn't sell me on a relationship or dynamic or any connection between the characters. So I'm feeling pretty neutral about that part so far. However, I am not liking Bryony as a character. I don't like the way that she like thinks and talks about other people a lot of times, that it's very like dismissive. So okay, some examples. One just being that like she has this horse named Fumblefoot, who he's called that because he often trips, and we find out that the reason he trips a lot is because his previous owner had really like abused him, and he has permanent damage to his body, to his joints, things like that, and so he tends to trip very often. But like the way that Bryony talks to the horse and thinks about him and talks about him is just like very, it just feels mean. Like she always calls him idiot, and she just like insults this poor horse, and like obviously the horse doesn't know. Like the way that she actually treats him is fine, she's not like harming him in any way, but it also doesn't make me like her as a character. Maybe it is supposed to come across as more of like a I don't know, like an endearing dynamic, that she means it in like a loving way, but that's really not the vibe that I'm getting from the way that she's thinking about this poor horse. Similarly, I don't like the way that she thinks and talks about one of her sisters. She has two sisters. Her older one, Holly, is very like practical, and the two of them are very similar in that way. But then her younger sister, Iris, is kind of like the dumb, silly, useless one who just likes pretty dresses. And I don't like the way that she like thinks about her, that she just sort of treats her as being useless. And a lot of times the author uses Iris as kind of a counterpoint to make a point about Bryony, and how Bryony is like better essentially than Iris. Because like there's a point, like an example would be when Bryony is still pretty new to the manor, she's thinking like, oh, Iris would love living in this beautiful manor and getting to wear all these pretty dresses, except that if she was here instead of me, she probably wouldn't have stopped crying yet. And the point being that like somehow that makes Bryony a better person, that she hasn't cried while she's been here, which I'm like, honestly, being kidnapped by a beast and forced to live in a like abandoned magical manor, I feel like crying in that scenario is very reasonable, and just there are lots of situations where I feel like the author is trying to compare these two and putting down Iris as being sort of stupid and silly and liking superficial things to make the point of Bryony being better because she's more practical and she suppresses her emotions and like all of that. Which again, doesn't make me like Bryony as a character. And I don't know if I would exactly call it that, like, not like other girls kind of syndrome, but I feel like it's edging into that territory and I'm not a fan. Especially like there's a scene at the very beginning when Bryony faints and she makes some comment about like, oh my god, I can't believe I fainted, like I hate women who faint, or like I have no patience for women who faint, or something like that. There's just like a lot of things. She constantly, oh my god, talks about how much she like hates pink and she doesn't like frilly dresses and she would rather wear plain clothes and men's boots and have dirt under her nails and all of this stuff, which I'm just like, oh my god, like I don't care. Especially, see, it keeps coming up because the room that she has in the house, the light is like attacking me, so hopefully it's not like too glaring. But the room that she has in the house is like all pink, and so pretty much every time she enters the room she has to describe how incredibly pink it is and also how much she hates pink. And I'm just like, or we could just like not talk about this constantly, like every time you enter your bedroom, like, because I don't care. The other thing also, just is just more of like a writing thing. You know how sometimes authors will hit on a descriptor of something that they enjoy or they think is so clever and then they keep using it and you're just like, not a fan. There's this one point where Bryony is looking at her bed, and the bed is this big like canopy bed and it's all pink, and she says something about how like, oh, she can't imagine sleeping in that bed because it would be like how she would imagine being in like a uterus or a womb or something would be like, because it's so pink. And she like mentions that multiple times and I'm just like, this is not a descriptor that I enjoy. So that's just like maybe nitpicky, but sometimes you just hit on those weird descriptors that you're like, would you please just stop using this because I don't like it. I do, however, really like her sister Holly because she is very practical in a way that I enjoy, and I don't know what the difference is, but I like Holly a lot. I think she's my favorite character other than Fumblefoot the horse. And Holly, apparently the local blacksmith is like into Holly, and I'm like, that's a story that I would read. I would love like the Holly blacksmith romance. Like, I'm already more invested in that than whatever's happening between Bryony and the Beast. That's where I'm at right now, so I'm about 40% of the way in. I'm going to finish it, but I'm not feeling very optimistic about this so far. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so I finished Bryony and Roses, and I gotta say, I liked the second half a lot more than the first half. For a few reasons. One being that we definitely got more into the Bryony Beast dynamic, which I liked a lot. They started to have more genuine conversations, started spending time together, you know, sharing their interests and hobbies with each other, and just having what felt like a more genuine connection between the two of them instead of just like a bantery dynamic. So I started to just be more interested in their relationship. I also liked that in the second half, Bryony starts really realizing that there is like some kind of curse going on and trying to kind of figure out the mystery behind this curse. Like, what is it? Why can't the Beast talk about it? And there's a lot of them trying to, her figuring it out and them trying to kind of work around the fact that there are certain things he can't say. And so them sort of sending back like coded messages to each other in kind of like these, or like these metaphoric conversations that they're having. So I liked her kind of getting more into the like mystery of the curse. And then at the end, there's this whole like, kind of like a final battle almost at the end, which was kind of fun. There were things about it that I really liked. I liked how gardening was involved in this like final showdown. There were also some pieces of the way that things played out that felt a little bit random that I was like, I don't know if I liked how that played out at the end, but whatever. There was something though about like in this like final showdown, there is a point where they just kind of like take a pause and have a conversation, and the beast pretty much just like explains everything about like his whole backstory and the curse and how it works and all of the stuff that he couldn't say before, and just does like this kind of info dump right then, which like was necessary information, like they needed it, but also just, I guess, timing and pacing wise, it felt weird. If the whole book had been like the second half, like if I had liked at that amount, then it maybe would have been at like a 3.5 to 4 star range, but I didn't like the first half of the book. So I gave it 3 stars because I don't think that the amount that I liked the second half, or the things that were different about the second half that made me enjoy it more, I don't think that those negate the things that I didn't like in the first half. So I gave it 3 stars overall. I debated giving it 2.5, but we're gonna be generous and give it 3. So at this point, what this is making me think is that maybe I just don't like her fairy tale retellings, because this is the second one I've read now, and they don't really seem to work for me. So I got one more book to read. I'm going to try What Moves the Dead, which honestly is the one that I was like the most suspicious of, not suspicious of, but like the most thinking that I probably won't like it going into this, because it is horror, and we know I don't really read horror, so we'll see what happens. I'm hoping that it will surprise me, and maybe I will find a horror book that I like, and like I'll have something that I can be excited about. But so far, like this T. Kingfisher experiment is going so-so. Good morning. Today we're trying a new hair thing. Last night I decided that I wanted to have bangs again, and so I cut my own bangs and tried styling them. And you know, while the decision to cut my own bangs in the middle of the night may be questionable, I feel like it didn't turn out too badly. I think that I need to still get better at styling them, because they're not styled exactly the way I want, and like they're not totally even. Like this side is straighter and this side's like curling a little bit more, but it's not so bad. I feel like I'm generally pretty confident with like cutting my own bangs, partially because I did it all throughout lockdown. Like I cut my own hair and it turned out all right, so I feel like I have some experience with it. And then also, one of the nice things about having like wavy curly hair is that if I decide I don't like this anymore and I just want to go back to styling it curly, like as long as I don't cut the bangs too short, I can just let my hair be curly, and you can't tell, because it all just becomes part of the curls. So I feel pretty confident about like cutting my own hair, even if it is always kind of questionable middle of the night decisions. Anyway, but like I missed having bangs, so I wanted to try it out again. We're seeing how it goes. Anyway, that's the hair update. Let's talk about books. Okay, the update is I finished What Moves the Dead. Okay, so I ended up getting interrupted, so I had to move. So we're outside now, but I'm not mad about it because it is beautiful outside today. There is somebody mowing their lawn though, so hopefully that's not too distracting. But let's just get into it, get into the actual book update portion of this. So update is I finished What Moves the Dead. I decided not to do a midway check-in because it's a really short book. It's a novella, and when I got to like the 40-50% mark, I just didn't have a lot to say about it, so I decided to just update at the end. So this is a gothic horror novella that I think is a retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe, which I'm not really familiar with, so I probably should do some Googling to learn a little bit more about the source inspiration for this. But in this, the main character that we're following is Easton, who is a retired soldier. At the beginning of the story, they get a letter from an old friend that they knew from their military days, saying that their friend is dying. And so Easton rushes to their friend's home to find out what's happening and if they can help. So the friend that they are visiting are the Ushers. It's a brother and sister that they knew, and the sister is dying. But when Easton gets there, like, things are just weird. Both of the siblings look very ill. Both of them look like they've aged more than they really should have in the amount of time. The house is creepy. There's a creepy lake. There are creepy rabbits, like, who don't know how to act like rabbits. There's just like a lot of things that are real weird and real off. And there is also something strange about the local mushrooms, which doesn't sound like it would be creepy, but it is. So I'm not going to go too much more into the plot of it because it's such a short book, but I will say I ended up being really surprised by this because I ended up really liking it. I was expecting this to probably be my least favorite of the 3 books that I was reading for this vlog, just because I don't really read or like horror. I also don't really like gothic settings in books very much. And yet, I really enjoyed this. I really think there was something about the way in which the horror elements of this were done that worked really well for me. Now, I've heard some people say, like, this doesn't even really count as horror because it's not super, like, horrific or anything. I think that it is, I'm not an expert, but I think that it probably is more in line with, like, gothic horror specifically, that is a little bit more like quiet, subtle, kind of creeping up on you type of horror, not necessarily like really gory or gruesome type of horror or other, I don't know, there are lots of different subgenres of horror. So anyway, I was just kind of surprised that I enjoyed it as much as I did. I don't feel like I have enough frame of reference or like data points to be able to connect the dots between like what is it about this horror specifically that worked for me when others don't. A few ideas that I have are like, maybe it's because the horror elements were kind of based in like nature, because there are these kind of like creepy mushrooms, creepy rabbits thing going on. I think that that is something that could work for me more, is that it's a sort of like creeping inevitability of nature, or like elements of nature or the natural world. I think that's something that could probably work well for me. And I think also it worked for me that it wasn't particularly gruesome or gory. It wasn't going for shock value. It was this more like subtle creeping kind of horror, but it also wasn't overly suspenseful. Sometimes I get impatient when it takes too long or things are trying to build suspense and I'm like, get to the point. But I think it worked well that this is a novella, that it was really short. That's all I can really come up with at the moment for this, but I ended up really liking this. I gave it 4 stars, and of the 3, I think this was actually my favorite thing that I read. So at the beginning of this, I think my original idea was that I would probably like Defensive Baking best, then Bryony and Roses, then What Moves the Dead. And at the end of this, my ranking goes What Moves the Dead, Defensive Baking, and then Bryony and Roses. Okay, so from that, what have I concluded about T. Kingfisher as an author? I don't think I have a real clear cut, like I do or do not like this author. I think that I have a better idea of what her writing is, and for me, what her writing strengths are, or where the best fit is. So I think that I will not, she's not going to be the kind of author where I'm like, oh, I should just read her whole backlist. I think I probably will try other things from her, but maybe more cautiously in the future, with a clearer idea of what it is that might or might not work for me. A couple of the things that I have determined, one being that I should not read her fairy tale retellings. I don't think that they work for me. That's a clear one for me. I think that maybe I would try more of her YA or middle grade. But I think she has a few more YA middle grade books. There's another series from her that I'm kind of interested in, which I think is called The Clockwork Boys or something like that. So those I may read cautiously. And I would be open to reading more horror from her, but also cautiously. The other connection that I can see in what I have liked from her is that, so Nettle and Bone and What Moves the Dead are my two favorite things that I have read from T. Kingfisher, and they are both her two traditionally published books, even though they are very different genres. And so that's making me think, well, I wonder if I just like her traditionally published work better. So that also means for me that, like, in the future, I will probably be more interested in reading anything she comes out with. Like, if she comes out with more traditionally published books, I will probably prioritize those over other things that she has written. I'd love to know, actually, a few things. One, if you have read both Nettle and Bone and What Moves the Dead, do you see any other connections between those two books? Because other than being traditionally published, I'm not sure if I see any clear connections between the two of them and why those would be my two favorites from her. But I would love to know if you see any other connections between them. I also would love to know if you have any recommendations for books that you think are similar to What Moves the Dead, because maybe I should give horror another try, but maybe be more focused in what I am trying and try to find something that is more similar to What Moves the Dead. So if there's anything that you think is similar to that, or you think I would like based on my vague ramblings about it, I would love to know. Yeah, and I also just always love to know any of your thoughts on T. Kingfisher and her books. Have you read her books? Do you see any, like, patterns in your own reading of, are there certain books from her that you think work for you or don't, or is she just an auto-read author for you, or her stuff never works? Like, I'd love to know your thoughts about whether she's an author for you or not. But I hope you all enjoyed this vlog. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.